The prophet, the king, and the cracked stone. When God shook Bethel. History is a selective editor, often remembering the architects of empires while forgetting the moments that cracked their foundations. We know the name Jeroboam, the man who tore 10 tribes from the house of David and forged the northern kingdom of Israel. We know his political genius, his fortifications, and his pragmatic ruthlessness. But beneath the canonical narrative of a divided monarchy lies a singular, terrifying event that defined the spiritual trajectory of a nation, a confrontation at an altar that wasn't just about theology, but about the very legitimacy of power. It is a story often glossed over in Sunday school summaries, reduced to a strange footnote involving a withered hand and a disobedient prophet. Yet this moment in Bethel is the hidden layer of Israel's history. It is the moment the state tried to domesticate the divine, and the divine answered with a violence that shattered stone. This isn't just a religious fable, it is a political thriller about the danger of weaponizing religion for national security. This is the account of the man of God from Judah and the altar of Jeroboam, a narrative of terrifying holiness, fatal disobedience, and the undeniable truth that even kings break when they collide with the word. Part 1. The Golden Calves, Manufacturing a Religion. To understand the shattering, we must first understand the construction. Jeroboam I, the first king of the breakaway northern kingdom, faced a crisis of legitimacy. His subjects were geographically separated from Jerusalem, but their hearts and their tithes still belonged to the Temple of Solomon in the south. Jeroboam knew that if his people continued to pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the festivals, their loyalty would eventually revert to the house of David. His solution was a masterstroke of political engineering. He created a state-sponsored alternative religion. He set up 2 golden calves, one in Dan, the far north, and one in Bethel, the southern border, just miles from Jerusalem. He told his people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." This wasn't paganism in the traditional sense. It was a syncretistic perversion of Yahwism. Jeroboam wasn't abandoning God. He was rebranding him. He established new festivals, ordained non-Levitical priests who were loyal to the crown, and built a massive altar at Bethel. This altar was the centerpiece of his new regime, a symbol of national independence and religious autonomy. It was the hidden foundation of his power, designed to make Jerusalem obsolete. But by politicizing worship, he had placed himself directly in the crosshairs of a God who refuses to be a political prop. Part 2. The Stranger from the South, a Walk into the Lion's Den. The narrative in 1 Kings 13 opens with cinematic tension. Jeroboam is standing at his great altar in Bethel, incense in hand, officiating the inaugural rites. The air is thick with smoke and the sound of chanting. It is the apex of his career. He is now king and high priest, the supreme authority of the north. Suddenly, a figure cuts through the crowd. The text calls him simply a man of God from Judah. He is unnamed, a ghost from the south, walking into enemy territory with a death warrant on his tongue. He doesn't bow. He doesn't acknowledge the king's guards. He walks straight to the altar, ignoring the man standing behind it. This is a critical detail often missed. The prophet doesn't speak to Jeroboam. He speaks to the altar. In the ancient Near East, an altar was a sacred intersection between heaven and earth. To curse an altar was to sever the hotline to the divine. He cries out, "O altar, altar, this is what the Lord says. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you." It was a prophecy of horrific desecration, predicting a specific king, Josiah, who would not be born for another 300 years. The audacity was absolute. A lone man, unarmed, was dismantling the state religion while the king stood inches away. Part 3. The Withered Hand, the Limit of Royal Power. Jeroboam, accustomed to absolute obedience, reacted with instinctual fury. He didn't debate the theology, he ordered an execution. Stretching out his hand from the altar, he pointed at the prophet and screamed, "Seize him!"
In that split second, the canonical narrative of royal invincibility collapsed. As the king's arm extended, it locked. The text describes it as drying up or withering instantly. The Hebrew implies a paralysis so rigid he could not pull it back to his chest. The limb that commanded armies was now a dead branch. Simultaneously, the sign the prophet had promised occurred. The massive stone altar, the pride of Jeroboam's engineering, cracked down the middle. The ash and fat of the sacrifices spilled out onto the ground, a grotesque display of rejection. The symmetry is devastating. The king is physically broken, and his religious system is structurally broken. The silence that must have fallen over Bethel is palpable. The guards didn't move. The incense stopped. In one moment, the entire political legitimacy of the northern kingdom was exposed as a fraud. The king stood there, arm useless, staring at a pile of rubble that used to be his legacy. Part 4. The Prayer of the Enemy, a humiliating reversal. What happens next is a profound irony. Jeroboam, the man who moments ago ordered the prophet's death, is now forced to beg for his help. "Intercede with the Lord your God and pray for me that my hand may be restored," he pleads. Notice the phrasing, "the Lord your God." Jeroboam acknowledges that his golden calves are mute. When reality strikes, the counterfeit religion offers no power. He has to appeal to the very God he tried to replace. The man of God prays, and the king's hand is restored. This should have been the turning point. Jeroboam had seen the power of Yahweh firsthand. He had been broken and healed in the span of minutes. But history is selective, and so is the heart. Jeroboam's gratitude was transactional, not transformational. He invites the prophet home for a meal and a reward, trying to co-opt the miracle worker, to turn a divine rebuke into a royal endorsement. He wants to buy the miracle worker, to turn a divine rebuke into a royal endorsement.
Part 5. The Fatal Meal, the Seduction of Comfort. The man of God refuses the king's offer with a strict citation of his orders. "Even if you were to give me half your possessions, I would not go with you, nor would I eat bread or drink water here. For I was commanded by the word of the Lord, you must not eat bread or drink water or return by the way you came." He leaves Bethel, his mission a perfect success. He has defied a king, shattered an altar, and rejected a bribe. But the story doesn't end with a victory lap. It ends with a tragedy that feels confusing to modern readers, but is essential to the hidden layer of the text. An old prophet living in Bethel, a man who had stayed silent while Jeroboam built his idols, hears of the events. He chases the man of God down and finds him resting under an oak tree. The old prophet lies to him, claiming an angel told him to bring the man back for food. The man of God from Judah, who could withstand the threats of a tyrant, crumbles before the hospitality of a peer. He goes back. He eats the bread. He drinks the water. He violates the direct command of God because he trusted the voice of religion over the voice of revelation. Part 6. The Lion's Vigil, a Message in Blood. The consequences are immediate. As they are eating, the word of the Lord comes, not to the faithful man, but to the liar. The old prophet is forced to pronounce doom on his guest. The man of God from Judah leaves, and on the road home, a lion meets him. But this is no ordinary animal attack. The lion kills the prophet, but does not eat him. It does not maul the donkey. Travelers passing by see a surreal tableau: the body of the man of God lying on the road, with the lion and the donkey standing essentially as honor guards on either side. This scene is the final, brutal sermon. If the lion were just a hungry beast, it would have eaten the corpse or the donkey. Its restraint proved that this was a divine execution. God was demonstrating that his word is absolute. If a prophet, his own messenger, cannot survive disobedience, how much less will Jeroboam survive? The shattering of the altar and the death of the prophet are two sides of the same coin. God is not safe. He cannot be manipulated by kings, and he cannot be taken lightly by his servants. Part 7. The Legacy of the Broken Stones. Jeroboam never recovered. The text says, after this event, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways. He doubled down, appointing more illicit priests. But the crack in the altar was a crack in his dynasty. His son died shortly after, and his entire house was eventually wiped out, swept away like dung, as a later prophecy crudely but accurately put it. 3 centuries later, a king named Josiah marched north from Jerusalem. He found the altar at Bethel, still standing but haunted by the old curse. He fulfilled the man of God's words to the letter, burning human bones on it and grinding it to dust. The hidden layer of this story is a warning about the fragility of institutions built on convenience. Jeroboam's altar was politically brilliant, but spiritually hollow. It looked like religion, it sounded like religion, but when the weight of truth fell upon it, it couldn't hold. Conclusion: the unsafe God. The story of the shattering of Jeroboam's altar challenges our modern desire for a domesticated faith. We like a God who endorses our political affinities and validates our cultural structures. But the God of Bethel is a disruptor. He breaks the arm of the king who tries to use him and stops the heart of the prophet who tries to edit him. The debris of that altar is a testament to the fact that truth is not a negotiation. Jeroboam built a religion that fit his needs, and it cost him his kingdom. The man of God compromised his instructions for a moment of comfort, and it cost him his life. In a world filled with golden calves, systems of power that demand our loyalty and promise us security, the story of the cracked stone reminds us to look for the cracks. It reminds us that eventually, every altar not built on the truth will be split apart, and only what is real will remain standing. What do you think is the modern equivalent of Jeroboam's altar? A system we build for security that actually leads us away from truth? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to explore more of the Bible's hidden history, subscribe and join us for the next excavation. Sources and further reading. Provan, E. and M. 2 Kings, New International Biblical Commentary. Excellent literary analysis of the narrative arc. Brueggemann, Walter. Prophetic Imagination. Explores how prophets dismantled royal narratives. Kogan, Mordecai. I. Kings, the Anchor Yale Bible Commentaries. Deep dive into the Hebrew text and historical context. Finkelstein, Israel, the Bible Unearthed. Provides archaeological context on the Northern Kingdom's religious sites, though critical. Leifhart, Peter, 1 and 2 Kings, Brazos Theological Commentary on the Bible. Theological focus on the political implications of idolatry. Walton, John H. Walton, Ancient Near Eastern Thought and the Old Testament. Contextualizes the concept of altars and divine presence.